Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Waring. I'm a silviculture professor at Northern Arizona University, based out of Flagstaff, Arizona. I've been here since 2006, so I've been here a long time now, it seems like. And our first stop on our tour today is in Aspen. So I'm out here in this aspen stand. It is mid-October, and we got our first snow yesterday. And so the leaves changed rapidly over the last couple of days. So it's quite beautiful out here now. And this is one of the important values for aspen in our area, is actually the aesthetics. So the work that we're about to present is a collaborative effort between the university and the Forest Service. And you're going to meet one of my graduate students, Connor Crouch. You're also going to meet Mark Nabel, who's a silviculturist with the Forest Service. And then there's two folks with Forest Health Protection who aren't out here today with us. And those folks, Amanda Grady and Nick Wilhelmi, have been really integral to getting all of these pieces in place for the project we're going to talk about today. So I wanted to just give them a shout out. Thanks. All right, so welcome to Aspen in Northern Arizona. And so can you please tell us who you are? I'm here with some local folks who manage Aspen.
My name is Mark Nabel. I'm a district silviculturist on the Flagstaff Ranger District of the Coconino National Forest. I've been in my current position for about 6 years and working around Northern Arizona for the better part of the last 20 years. One of my primary duties is to manage our aspen restoration program here on the Flagstaff Ranger District.
So, Mark, can you tell us more about the ecology of aspen in Northern Arizona and the importance to the Coconino National Forest?
Absolutely. So on the Coconino National Forest, we have about 15,000 acres of aspen amidst a sea of ponderosa pine. We have about 900,000 acres of ponderosa pine. So what I like to tell people is that aspen's kind of an oasis in a desert of ponderosa pine. And, it has a lot of value for wildlife and also brings a lot of money into the local Flagstaff economy. Every fall around this time of year, a lot of people come up from Phoenix and stay in hotels and spend a lot of time out here looking at aspen as the leaves are changing, and so it's got value in those two ways. There are also certain species here in Northern Arizona, some bird species, red-naped sapsucker, Williamson sapsucker, and others that really rely on these small inclusions of aspen within our ponderosa pine and mixed conifer forest, and we want to manage it for some of those species. It's also heavily used by deer and elk as a browse species, and so we maintain it for that purpose as well.
So, Mark, can you tell us more about the basic management strategy for regenerating aspen out here?
Absolutely. So in the absence of a landscape scale stand replacing fire, really the only place we've been able to successfully regenerate aspen on flat ground is to build these 7 to 8 foot tall exclosure fences to keep the ungulates out. And pretty much without fail, if we build an exclosure around a stand of aspen, we will get a ton of regeneration on the order of, hundreds to thousands of stems to the acre. You can see outside the exclosure, it's not that there's a lack of aspen sprouts out there, but they're not having a chance to recruit because of the heavy browsing that we have by ungulates. And that's a combination of deer, elk, and cattle. This area is grazed by cows as well. And so the combination of those factors really restricts any sort of regeneration from successfully recruiting outside the exclosures. So we have about 300 acres worth of exclosures here on the Flagstaff Ranger District, about 70 different exclosures encompassing that 300 acres. And this is really where we're able to successfully manage aspen regeneration. We do have some bigger plans to try to get aspen to regenerate outside of these exclosures too, working with game and fish to control especially the elk population, but also the deer population to some extent. We have hope that maybe we can get aspen to regenerate outside, but for now these exclosures are really where we've got this successful aspen regeneration occurring.
So we have another local expert out here with us today as well. So can you please tell us who you are?
My name is Connor Crouch. I'm a PhD student in the School of Forestry at Northern Arizona University, where I'm working with Kristen Waring to look at what is limiting successful aspen regeneration and recruitment in Northern Arizona.
Okay, so Connor, can you tell us more about oyster shell scale out here?
Yeah, so oyster shell scale is an invasive insect that's been in the US for almost 3 centuries now. It's very common across North America on urban trees and fruit tree orchards and things of that nature. It's a polyphagous insect, so it's able to infest a wide range of hosts. There's over 100 known hosts of oyster shell scale. But historically, the insect hasn't been an issue outside of those urban or ornamental settings until recent years, where we've begun to see outbreaks of oyster shell scale in natural aspen stands throughout northern Arizona. Concerningly, it's not something that is just present out here. It's actively causing dieback and mortality of our aspen. We've done some kind of preliminary research just looking at where the insect occurs across Arizona, which stands it's most common in. And what we've tended to find is that it generally occurs in lower elevation aspen stands, so below 2,500 meters or about 8,200 feet. And another important finding has been that we tend to see oyster shell scale a lot more commonly in ungulate exclosures, where we have a kind of denser aspen resource, especially of varying size classes, than outside of exclosures.
So how does the oyster shell scale work? What does it look like? How does it kill trees? How do we even identify it?
So oyster shell scale is a tiny, tiny insect. They're generally only 1 to 2 millimeters in length. So in areas where population levels are low, it's very difficult to detect, even when you're out looking for it intentionally. But in stands like this one that has abundant oyster shell scale, it's quite easy to see even at a distance. Obviously, aspen tends to have that whiter bark, but along these infested stems, you can see these darker patches of gray or almost black. And most of this stem is covered in oyster shell scale. You can see they're just these tiny, tiny insects. Essentially what they do is for most of their life cycle, they're not moving. Once they find a site to feed, they'll settle down there for their entire life. They just have a tiny piercing sucking mouthpart that they'll insert just below the bark of aspen, and they will suck fluid from the cells beneath the bark. And what we've noticed is that by cutting some smaller stems with heavy infestations, you can actually see black necrotic tissue beneath aspen's bark. That's a result of oyster shell scale feeding.
So Mark, we're out here in this stand of aspen inside an exclosure that's been really heavily impacted by the oyster shell scale. There's been a lot of mortality and decline in here. So can you tell us about the silvicultural treatments that are planned or have already been partially implemented and where we are in that process out here?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're looking at a few different approaches for managing oyster shell scale. We know insecticides can be helpful. We know that prescribed burning may have a role in controlling oyster shell scale. But on this particular experiment, we're really comparing different silvicultural methods for controlling it. So off here to my right, we have a clear fell treatment that has already been partially implemented. This was in 2019. So the idea here is if we take off the overstory, will the regeneration, the suckering that occurs, get reinfected with oyster shell scale? And if so, how does that play out over time? So we're now standing in the pre-commercial thinning unit, and you can see we put these orange dots on the trees that we're going to leave at roughly 10 by 10 foot spacing. You can see this one's 7-8 inches in diameter, does not have oyster shell scale infestation, and so this is one that we want to leave. And then we've got a tree right next to it that's smaller diameter, probably 4 or 5 inches, and this one does have some oyster shell scale infestation. So these are the kind of trees that we want to cut out and then see how that big tree that we're leaving fares over time.
Connor, can you tell us about your research out here on aspen and with oyster shell scale?
Yeah, so my project is kind of looking at sites that are representative of where aspen occurs across Arizona. From the aspen standpoint, we're trying to look at a wide range of factors to determine what is limiting successful regeneration and recruitment and causing perhaps disproportionate mortality in those size classes. So specific things we're looking at there are the role that fire might play in increasing regeneration and recruitment, looking at different management strategies like exclosures, and then we're also looking at a wide range of biotic factors such as the presence of ungulate browse and other ungulate impacts, and then presence of various insects and diseases, including oyster shell scale. Kind of the second part of my project is using that same broad, expansive look of aspen plots across Arizona to specifically understand where oyster shell scale occurs across the state, and trying to use those same biotic and abiotic factors to understand which of those affects presence and severity of oyster shell scale.
Thanks for stopping by this afternoon. We've had a good time showing you and telling you about our aspen projects going on in northern Arizona. Take care.